Kingdom Hearts 2 is undeniably the most beloved Kingdom Hearts title. Hell, it's one of the most beloved games of its time, and still to this day. Even if Kingdom Hearts 2 isn't your favorite Kingdom Hearts game, odds are you probably still rank it well above most other games in the series. I mean, aside from Kingdom Hearts 1 and maybe 3 if you really love that Remind DLC, what competition even is there? You'd be hard-pressed to find anyone who outright hates Kingdom Hearts 2. Unless they just didn't like the series that much to begin with. That being said, there's no such thing as a perfect video game, no matter what you might think. There is no such person who doesn't have at least a little bit of bias. In recent years especially, plenty of Kingdom Hearts fans have raised valid critiques on areas where Kingdom Hearts 2 steps back compared to Kingdom Hearts 1. Even most Kingdom Hearts 2 fans will acknowledge these points, and yet it still holds its place at the top for a lot of people, including myself. But why is that? Most people will boil it down to because the gameplay's the best. While I don't doubt that the gameplay is largely part of the reason, I feel like that's really underselling it. I want to propose that there's a lot more to it than just that. See, a thing a lot of fandoms do is they like to keep things simple. When describing multiple games in a series, they take each game's strongest point and kind of end up treating it like it's the only selling point. You know, you got the story game, the gameplay game, the characters game. But of course, videos like this one wouldn't exist if it really just came down to that. Unfortunately though, my opinion is not objective, and I can only speak for myself. I can explain away my reasons for loving this game all I want, and some of them might overlap with yours. But it is humanly impossible for me to definitively say why everyone loves Kingdom Hearts 2. Well, video over, I guess. That was easy.
How come I just let you walk away? Just let you leave without a trace.
Okay, real shit though. I played through this game and got every single achievement, so I think I have a pretty good grasp on this game's strengths. Therefore, if I talk about every single strength, I'm bound to encompass every reason why everyone loves Kingdom Hearts 2.
A scattered dream that's like a far-off memory. A far-off memory that's like a scattered dream. I want to line the pieces up. Yours and mine.
Just to be clear here, I have my own fair share of gripes with this game, but there's also a lot that I'm more than willing to defend and embrace about it. A good amount of these points may even go against the grain. One of the biggest criticisms this game gets is the way it opens its story. It's no secret 20 years later that Kingdom Hearts 2 is not the second Kingdom Hearts game, neither chronologically or release-wise. See, there's this little-known game called Kingdom Hearts Chain of Memories for the Game Boy Advance. Unlike Kingdom Hearts 2, this game picks up right off where Kingdom Hearts 1 ended. Fun fact, Chain of Memories was actually my first Kingdom Hearts game, with most of my knowledge of the first game's story coming from the manga. That, and you know, there's my whole childhood story of how I never had a PS2 growing up, but, you know, besides the point. Obviously, there's gonna be some missing context for any of the PlayStation-only players who never owned a Game Boy. Something that I don't hear enough people talk about, though, is how Kingdom Hearts 2's prologue handles this dilemma very well. Instead of simply summarizing the events of Chain of Memories, the game takes this opportunity to set the stage for this game, while giving the player just enough context to understand what's going on here. Sora lost his memories between this game and Kingdom Hearts 1, had to be put into stasis, and reunited with his other half Roxas to finally awaken. You're also shown very brief recaps of the first game through Roxas's recurring dreams, which have a story reason for being there. Realistically, you don't need to know the full story behind Castle Oblivion to understand Kingdom Hearts 2, but the game does leave enough breadcrumbs to leave the player curious as to what may have happened. Like, Organization 13 is named after its 13 members, but only half of them show up in the story. What's up with that? In Kingdom Hearts 2 Final Mix, you fight the ghosts of the members you don't meet in this game. You can understand the game just fine without ever knowing who these characters are, but it'd sure be nice to know. This was probably the best way they could have handled it, without trivializing Chain of Memories in the grander story, but also without alienating anyone who didn't play it. And also just good marketing for Chain of Memories, I guess. I'm not even gonna lie, Kingdom Hearts 2 benefits far more from having this prologue than not. Without it, the player would have just been thrown into the story right when Sora wakes up, and either A, not have any clue what's going on, or B, have the required context exposition dumped onto the player. Tetsuya Nomura states that Kingdom Hearts 2 was always planned to take a year or two after Kingdom Hearts, and they figured the Game Boy Advance game they were still conceptualizing at the time could fill in the gap. So I guess you could say the way the prologue was handled was pretty much inevitable. But the purpose of this prologue has multiple layers to it. What I just explained is the practical layer. There's also the narrative layer, which is probably the part most of you were waiting for because it's the one most repeated on the internet. So, despite how not well received this prologue was at first, it definitely sold tons of people on Roxas as a character. Roxas is our new protagonist. At least, you're led to believe that for a short time before the story starts to unfold. If you watched my first Kingdom Hearts video, you'll remember I praised the prologue of that game for immersing the player in the lives of the characters before tearing it all away from them. The prologue of Kingdom Hearts 2 is also very good at this. But it's also extremely cruel, exclusively to Roxas. The game deceptively introduces you to Roxas by placing you into a day in his daily life, just like with Sora. He's got his own friend group, which I'm not gonna bother breaking down this time since it's really not as deep as the friend trio of Kingdom Hearts 1, as you'll find out. But nonetheless, you were led to believe that Roxas has lived a normal life in Twilight Town his whole life, and is even well known around town. You have a whole ass rival gang of Final Fantasy characters that seem to already have an established vendetta against you. The game also just does a good job fleshing out Twilight Town as a world with stuff like the 7 Wonders of Twilight Town. Remember how sword fighting was just a hobby on Destiny Island? Well, in Twilight Town, it's basically the national sport there. They had some extra rules with stealing balls or some shit, but details. It's championship sword fighting. There are a lot of interesting parallels and stark contrasts that you can make with Destiny Islands and Traverse Town, the places you kick off your journey in the first game, which I've always found interesting. Destiny Islands is a rural locale, while Twilight Town is a more populated area with lots of interconnecting areas and districts, sharing a bit more in common with Traverse Town in this regard, but Twilight Town definitely feels a lot more open in its structure. You've got stuff like the tunnels and the train leading you to other districts. And hell, the existence of the train implies that there's even more to this place. Roxas and his friends talk about wanting to take a train to the beach. It's really more like a city than just a small town. Hey, maybe if Riku was born here instead of Destiny Islands, he wouldn't have opened the door to darkness. If anything, he could have just taken a train to get out of here. Like I said before, the main sport around here seems to be sword fighting, but this time with foam bats. I mean, I guess it's probably a little bit safer and more parent-approved. Like Destiny Islands, you have local Final Fantasy characters who are already familiar with our protagonist. However, rather than being friends, these guys are considered your rivals who apparently already have one up on you at the start of the game. Aside from Vivi, who's from Final Fantasy IX, the rest of them are from Final Fantasy VIII. Cypher is also...
That was undeniable proof that we totally owned you, lamers.
Yeah. A very stark contrast to the mature, battle-hardened Squall in this universe, who comes from the same game as Cypher. Good incentive to kick his ass, at least. Come to think of it, this world introduces way more Final Fantasy representation than the first game did, Setzer from Final Fantasy VI is also in this game. He's kinda like that man-child chef from iCarly who gets really ass-hurt losing to children at cooking, so then he starts wrestling middle schoolers so he can win and inflate his ego again. In Kingdom Hearts 1, the Destiny Islands prologue took place over the course of just 2 days. In Kingdom Hearts 2, the prologue takes place over the course of 6 days. The game definitely goes more out of its way to flesh out Twilight Town than Destiny Islands or Traverse Town. Hell, you don't even see the town where Sora lives in the first game. You get a very brief glimpse of it in this game, though. But as Roxas is just trying to live his honestly pretty sweet life, strange occurrences start interrupting it, only to get dropped back into it like nothing happened. This isn't like the Heartless attack where they kinda just come and destroy a world. These different beings called nobodies only seem interested in Roxas. Sora getting ripped away from his normal life was definitely a lot more abrupt, while with Roxas, it's something they more steadily build up to. I realize I may have trailed off into a separate world-building layer, but I assure you, it was necessary to show you the true magnitude of how they turned this poor guy's life upside down. So every time one of these anomalies happens, you'll notice these two shady guys discussing among themselves as though talking from the outside. Yeah, you probably see where I'm going with this. Roxas's life? It's all fake. Twilight Town? It's a real place. But the one you start out in is just a simulation of it. Roxas himself? Well, he's real. Just not in the way you'd assume. What kind of fuck-ass answer is that? Is probably what a normal layperson would ask in response to that. He's real in the sense that he had a totally different life before this simulation stuff. It wasn't as a normal boy though. He was part of this group called Organization 13. What they do isn't made entirely clear yet, but considering they're sending sexy hitmen after you, I think it's safe to assume they're not very nice people. Okay, but how doesn't he exist? Well, to put it simply, he's a nobody. You know, those weird elusive specimens, but more intelligent. The short story is that when a person with a strong heart becomes a heartless, the heart becomes the heartless, ironically enough, but the remaining body reanimates into a husk without emotions. Although, that very much comes into question later. Now, who do we know that became a Heartless that could also wield the Keyblade? Shit. There's some weird shenanigans with how Sora quickly regained his human form after the fact, but that's a debacle for several games from now. So, Roxas simply being a thing has really messed up the progress of restoring Sora's memories. You know, the premise I mentioned way earlier, Roxas is half of Sora. The dreams Roxas has been having of the first game's events were actually the process of Sora's memories being restored in real time. But as if it wasn't enough to simply remove him from the simulation once the restoration was complete, the man orchestrating all this named Diz had to erase his existence in the simulation, making Roxas watch all his friends phase through him and everything. Diz deliberately chose to rub it in that the world would move on without Roxas. As far as they're concerned, Roxas never existed. Roxas truly is nobody.
You're lucky. Looks like my summer vacation is over.
Wait, that's when the title drops? That's just cold. Oh yeah, the game is actually starting now. Fuck you, game. Stop agreeing with the audience. In Kingdom Hearts 1, the title drops shortly after Sora wakes up. Kingdom Hearts 2 also begins with Roxas waking up from a dream, and they could have easily inserted the logo there, but nope. This isn't Roxas's story. The game tricks you into thinking it's his story for a little bit, but never lies to you and says that it is. And then they put a happy reunion scene between Sora, Donald, and Goofy right after?
They're making me happy and sad at the same time. This shouldn't be legal.
Hey, sorry for that little outburst. Are you enjoying the video so far? I've talked about plenty of video games in this same fashion, and I plan to keep doing it. If you want to see more, scroll down and click that subscribe button if you haven't already. It only takes a second, and it really does help a ton. Where was I? Oh, yeah. That brings me to the next layer of how this prologue is great. The way Kingdom Hearts 2 gradually accustoms the player to the new combat movement. KH2 is known for having much more agile gameplay than the first game. This is true, but the game doesn't immediately start that way. You can definitely tell right off the bat that Roxas feels a bit more mobile than KH1 Sora, but he still mimics KH1 Sora's animations in combat. It's when you're introduced to reaction commands that you really start to notice the pacing of battles pick up. And to be clear, I'm not saying this to spite KH1's combat. I spent a huge chunk of a 1 hour long video gushing over it. I'm just explaining how KH2 cleanly transitions from that into its own unique combat quirks. It's a very simple reaction command that just puts you behind the enemy and confuses them for a bit. These dusk enemies are the only ones you fight up until the first boss. Twilight Thorn is the nobody equivalent of Darkseid. From the scene composition to its effectiveness as a tutorial boss, Darkseid taught the player a couple different things, like parrying projectiles and scoring tech points by climbing up its arm and hitting its face. Twilight Thorn is your true introduction to reaction commands. They're not just for avoiding attacks, but can be used to fight back and create openings too. If you manage to defeat this boss with the Break Raid command, this becomes even more apparent. They slowly introduce more reaction commands in combat for the rest of Roxas's chapter, but after Sora takes over, that's when the subtle changes start to add up. Sora's movement animations are different now compared to before. Even though he's still about as mobile as Roxas, you get the sense that he's gotten more dexterous with his Keyblade despite forgetting all his previous abilities. From there, Sora will slowly start to gain more of his combat abilities, which brings me to my next point. I think most people can agree that Kingdom Hearts 2's greatest strong point, at least relative to the other games, is its combat. But what is it that makes it so great? Originally, I was only gonna use Kingdom Hearts 2 Final Mix as the reference point for this discussion. In my video on the first Kingdom Hearts game, I really did not have much to say about the differences in combat. Sure, the lack of combo modifiers to make your attacks more fluid would make a difference to someone who is really used to having them, but as I established in that video, I'm primarily reliant on magic and air combos in KH1 anyway, so it didn't impact my experience as much as it would someone else's. Kingdom Hearts 2 is a very different story though, where the game largely favors ground combat over mid-air attacks about halfway through the game. This is another area where KH2 gradually and cleverly adjusts you to its new rules. At the beginning of the game, your air combos are still gonna come out faster than on the ground. However, you'll soon realize that jump spamming spells isn't really a viable option anymore. Casting spells in the air will actually leave you vulnerable for a second or two, so you can't continually land cancel and cast spells repeatedly like before. The MP system has also completely changed. The MP unit system has been replaced with a more traditional MP bar, and rather than starting with a small amount and gradually gaining more, you spend most of the game with just 100 MP, with only a few small increments closer to the end of the game. So effectively, the amount of times you can cast spells will be consistent throughout the whole game, and you'll only realistically get a couple extra casts by the end of it. It presents an interesting compromise where you can cast more spells at the beginning, but you won't be able to go as nuts as you could by the end of the first game. Running out of MP also means you gotta wait for a recharge time, with ethers cutting off a chunk of that wait time, or just fully restoring your MP if you're above 0. But buying enough ethers to sustain yourself will cost quite a bit of money. So regardless of whether you're someone who frequently uses magic or not, You will inevitably have to engage with the game's melee combat on a more intricate level than I got away with in the original KH1. At the beginning, they introduce you to the usual stuff, like sliding dash, but then the game slowly starts to implement abilities that allow you to cleanly transition from a ground combo into an air combo. Upper slash comes to mind as the early game example, allowing you to knock enemies into the air and pivot mid-combo. Then later in the game, you learn finishing leap, letting you chain a full ground combo into an air combo. They even give you a keyblade that boosts your air combo damage very early in the game, as if to tell the player to keep holding out on relying on ground combos for a while. At least until you finally obtain the ground combo boosting keyblade, Decisive Pumpkin. You conveniently get this keyblade after learning your first real ground finisher, Guard Break. You know, the one that doesn't purely exist just to facilitate more air combat. The game becomes more confident in its ground combat, giving you lots of moves that provide both style and a practical application in real-time combat. Every action ability has some type of case scenario. Retaliating Slash isn't an ability I really like. I pretty much never equip it, and honestly, I wouldn't really recommend it either. But if you're someone who likes using Horizontal Slash, this attack can very cleanly flow into a string of horizontal slashes. Personally, I'd rather just use aerial recovery to, well, recover from getting juggled by the enemy. But against the right enemies, it can be pretty satisfying. Yes, even Dodge Slash has its uses. In the original Kingdom Hearts 2, that is. Okay, this is the part where my mentioning of the original game finally becomes relevant. So, as established earlier, the Final Mix editions of these games tend to add new abilities, many of which include action abilities that modify how your combo executes, hence the term combo modifier. In KH1, combo modifiers hardly exist, so everything was just brand new and added more depth to the combat as a whole. KH2 already had its own modifiers serving their own purposes in battle, but Final Mix would add a few more. However, most of these new abilities served a similar purpose to already existing abilities, but just did the job better. For example, Aerial Dive completely replaces Aerial Sweep, since it has a wider detection range and lands more hits. Dodge Slash is a case that doesn't get discussed very often. In fact, I'm gonna make a bold move here and argue that Dodge Slash exists out of necessity in the original KH2. You see, Dodge Slash is actually the precursor to Flash Step, an ability that helps compensate for the slight enemy knockback between hits in your combo by closing the gap between you and the enemy. Flash Step is quicker, as the name suggests, and more consistently lands its hits than Dodge Slash. However, before Flash Step existed, Dodge Slash was the only ability that really served a similar function. I played through all the mandatory stuff in the original game without Dodge Slash equipped, and I found myself whiffing and dropping combos to enemies only a few inches away from me. I thought to myself, how did anyone play this back then? This is awful. I beat the game with minimum content and planned to leave it at that. Until one day I had this random thought at the gym. I was thinking about Sora's silly little ballet dance he does when dodge slashing. A very normal thought to have at the gym, I know, but it was only then when it hit me. That tap dance ain't just for show. It's slow as fuck, but those few little footsteps Sora takes is what I need to close the small gap between him and the enemies that I keep whiffing. I went back and played through the rest of the optional content, and lo and behold, the combat became much more fluid and enjoyable. Not all 3 hits of Dodge Slash will consistently hit, but I only had one instance during Sephiroth's fight where it whiffed and he retaliated too quickly for me to react. It's not great, by any stretch of the imagination, but in a game where there's no alternative, it gets the job done. I'm sorry I ever doubted you, Kingdom Hearts 2. When I talked about the first game, I stated that Kingdom Hearts leans into its turn-based influences and was better off for it. While Kingdom Hearts 2 is a much faster-paced action game, I'd still say the combat, particularly in boss fights, still have a very turn-based flow to them. To those of you who have seen my video on Raida Remastered, that was almost 5 months ago. You might remember one of my qualms with that game is that the combat largely boils down to hacking away at enemies until they just happen to start winding up for an attack animation. They barely seem to react to your attacks at all, and your only indication that you're doing anything is their health bar going down. Kingdom Hearts 1 had a flinch count, where some bosses would just immediately retaliate after a certain number of hits, where they visually indicate impact. Kingdom Hearts 2 expands on this idea with a hidden mechanic it introduces. While it was always there doing its work, it took until years after the game came out for people to actually get a full grasp on how it works and visually indicate it to the internet. If you're not new to the series, then you've probably heard of it by now. The player base has dubbed this mechanic revenge value. Rather than being a simple hit counter, each step of a combo adds a certain amount of revenge. Some attacks add more revenge value than others. Combo finishers add way more revenge than any of the preceding hits. The splash damage of Reflect will always add revenge value, while most other magic will not add any revenge, unless it's a combo finisher. I don't know the specifics for stuff like summons and limits, but that's the general gist of it. Now of course, enemies can still just recover from hit stun and attack you if you don't follow up fast enough, or with a hit in your combo. This new mechanic, however, makes it so that you can't endlessly keep humanoid bosses specifically in an endless stun lock. This is where that turn-based flow comes into play. Your turn versus their turn. You find an opening against a boss and capitalize on it. Great, your turn begins. Your turn ends when either you lose your groove and the enemy recovers, or you get a little too power hungry and push them over the edge. Either way, your turn will inevitably end. When exceeding the amount of revenge value a given boss will tolerate, I guess, they will immediately break out of your onslaught to finally start their turn. When do you get your turn again? When you find another opening to capitalize on. This can be easier or harder depending on how aggressive the boss is, but it really does wonders for the pacing of these fights. But if you take too long and keep passing up your turns, some bosses will actually taunt you for it.
I want to see you die fighting. You're far too lax.
What's wrong? Are you scared?
Again, not to shit on Raida or other hack-and-slash games like it, I was mostly positive about that game when it came out, but it felt like stuff was just kinda happening around you in those boss fights. Everything just kinda feels like collateral damage. The boss doesn't feel like it's fighting you, per se, it feels more like it's going on a blind rampage and you're just caught in the middle of it. KH2's combat feels like the exact opposite. The boss is out for your blood. When you humiliated that boss juggling him for 10 seconds straight, yeah, they took that personally. It's a back and forth fight, like a shonen anime, but way faster. So like the manga, basically. This mechanic was so well praised that they just had to bring it back for Kingdom Hearts 3. It was a praise I heard in early gameplay reviews of KH3. Needless to say, I don't think that anyone would have been happy if they did away with it or replaced it with a simplified stand-in. So while Final Fantasy representation may be waning in later titles, I don't think Kingdom Hearts as a series is in any danger of losing ties with its FF origins, so long as it continues to keep this turn-based philosophy in their fast-paced action gameplay. I know that's a lot to take in, so I'll give you a second to take a breather. Are you good now? Okay. Now, would you believe me if I said there's even more to the combo game? I mentioned magic earlier. Casting a spell is no longer just a singular action that's repeatable, like in the first game. Instead, it's now part of your combo. At the start or middle of a combo, it can be used in rapid succession on the ground, that is. Remember, I said air casting is kinda risky. But casting a spell at the end of your combo is kinda like Sora getting one last shot in there before needing to take a breath. There are ways to stall your magic combo so you don't reach your finisher, but not every enemy is going to make it easy for you to do that. Magic is still a powerful tool, but it takes more discipline to really make use of. This is even more true for KH2's new resource to manage, the Drive Gauge. This is the resource that summons consume this time around. While there are less of them than in the first game, that doesn't really weaken them as a mechanic. Most summons are really good for crowd control. Chicken Little is an early game substitute for Magnet. Once you do get Magnet, you can follow up with one of Genie's limits to destroy crowds of enemies. Stitch can save you in a pinch by stun-locking enemies and making them drop HP orbs. Alternatively, he can restore your MP when you're not on low health. Peter Pan is kind of the opposite of the other summons. Instead of crowd control, he helps you wail on a singular target, while Tinkerbell will revive you once if you die. But of course, that's not the main mechanic this gauge is named after. The primary purpose of your drive points is to use them on the appropriately named drive forms. There are only 4 words I can think of to really describe this mechanic, and those words are hype, moments, and aura.
Dual wield!
You know, I'm not afraid to admit that quite a lot of things in Kingdom Hearts 2's combat largely exist for the spectacle. I mean, realistically, what function do most of the boss reaction commands serve outside of making sure you're not asleep at the controller?
Wake up, you're missing all the cool shit happening on screen, wake up!
Drive forms, on the other hand, are probably the weirdest yet effective balance between style versus substance. Many of the later entries in this series would try to capture the same level of spectacle, but it just doesn't hit as hard. Why is that? 2 words: skill ceiling. While yes, drive forms are insanely powerful, and have the potential to shred through many health bars of bosses, the resource is kind of at a premium. Yes, there are ways to speed up drive gauge recovery, and items that can also just restore a flat amount. But the rate at which you burn through that resource is way faster than the rate you can recover. Cerberus Cup doesn't count, that's an out-of-the-way gimmick. Even the really cheap methods to get your drive back, like exiting the world before your form gauge runs out, kinda require you to walk on eggshells, which is very much not what these forms are designed with in mind. Couldn't you tell just by how these forms control? You basically have to get used to a whole new moveset with each form. Valor form is all melee, no magic or limits whatsoever. Wisdom form is all magic, no melee. If you do run out of magic, your MP charges faster, but you're stuck with this dinky pea shooter for that duration. Master form excels in both, while turning everything into an air combo, including your magic. And as we've established earlier, magic in the air is normally risky, but now you're free to rain down with your spells, weaving them into your combos for a short time. Final form is easily the most powerful, but also very slippery, as you're always hovering in this form. And your combos are very erratic, and it's kind of hard to get yourself out of them once you start. Now, this is just a personal preference thing, but I find that using Master Form is safer and kind of more fun to control, even at the cost of not being as powerful. Attacking enemies in any way expends your form gauge faster. It's not just about the power trip or the stylish combos, it's about making the most out of it. Because before you know it, it'll be over just like that. Going into a drive form restores your HP and MP, but getting dropped out of one leaves you in whatever state you were in before. Make it count. Too often I find that games will just give you the cool screen nuke attack. Sure, it can be based on many different factors, but it never really makes me think to myself, do I want to use this now or save it? There's usually no reason not to just use it. In Kingdom Hearts 2, if I'm on a roll and doing fine without the help, I won't waste the drive points on a form or a summon. I'd rather win the battle with my own devices. And the payoff for doing that is that I can save it for a different occasion. Doesn't always have to be a boss. It can be a really tough forced encounter with regular enemies that are a difficulty spike compared to what you were fighting before. Or maybe you've become wary of the punishment the game gives you for relying on drive forms too much. You've heard of high risk, high reward, right? Well, that's basically what anti-form is. It can unexpectedly get you out of tight situations on occasion, but because this form usually comes out unexpectedly, it rarely ever works out for you. The biggest deal breaker is not being able to pick up HP orbs, and losing all your drive points even if the form you chose wouldn't have eaten up all of them. But even something as erratic and risky as anti-form ends up being just as cool as a lot of the other stuff in this game. Sora's movements become animalistic, his attacks become wilder, it feels like Sora himself is raging at the game. Kingdom Hearts 1 didn't do a lot to convince me that there was darkness in Sora's heart. The fact that someone with such a strong heart turned into just a basic shadow has me thinking he must not have had a lot of darkness to begin with. But this kinda got me thinking twice about that. Mid to late 2000s were the advent of Edge, and Kingdom Hearts gladly took its share of it. This game's even got skateboarding and a motorcycle portion. Something easy to pick up, hard to master, but no sequel, no matter how good, is a perfect upgrade in every way. Again, if you watched my KH1 video, you know that I greatly value being able to play a game countless times and make every playthrough feel fresh. While replaying KH2 has never not been fun for me, I find myself always resorting to the same playstyle and strategies that I do every playthrough. It's very easy to fall back on your old habits when you've already got a game plan. I was afraid I would eventually optimize the fun out of the game if I just did the same thing again for this video. So, just like with my KH1 video, I set out to try different things and use more of the abilities and mechanics I don't normally use. Just one small problem. All of your active abilities are learned through game progression, not level up. Sure, I tried changing up the order I did worlds in, which slightly affected when I got to make use of certain skills. However, certain worlds are locked behind the completion of others. This means that the most pertinent abilities will always be learned at the same point in the game no matter what. For example, in KH2 Final Mix, you get the explosion ability from defeating the horde of enemies swarming the Solar Sailor. This happens in the second chapter of Space Paranoids, which doesn't unlock until you complete the second chapter of every other world, besides Atlantica and 100 Acre Wood, obviously. But what about the ability roots? Well, unfortunately, these do very little in the way of pushing the player towards a certain playstyle. Remember that all level up abilities are support ones. What this ultimately amounts to is the order you get certain defensive and damage boosting passives getting shuffled around. For example, the Warrior will get you combo boost and reaction boost the earliest, while missing out on defensive passives like Once More, Second Chance, and Damage Control for most of the game. The Guardian gets those defensive abilities earliest, but losing out on magic boosting passives and gimmick abilities like Negative Combo and Berserk Charge. Let it be known that most speedrunners picked Guardian during the early days of KH2 speedrunning, and while the meta has shifted towards Warrior, I've heard that the strategies are largely the same, with time saves coming from earlier XP boost and passive damage optimization. Guardian still gets most of the Warrior's melee-focused passives in a somewhat timely manner, so for a casual playthrough, it's effectively the same. The Mystic gets the earliest possible XP boost, as well as all the elemental boost passives sooner. In exchange, it gets the abilities Warrior benefits from the latest, while still getting Once More only a little bit later than Guardian. Second Chance is just around the start of post-game grinding. While there does seem to be an attempt to push the player towards different playstyles, none of these choices inherently change the way you play. Regardless of how much you care about slight damage optimizations, you're either someone already inclined to use magic frequently, or you aren't. However, there is something about Mystic Path that makes it more unique than the other two routes. The Mystic Path gets the gimmicky abilities, Negative Combo and Berserk Charge, the earliest of all three routes. Because I tend to conserve my resources in RPGs a lot, I don't often end up using magic or summons as much as I could get away with. While it isn't much, I figured if I want to change things up as much as possible, I should go with Mystic Path this time. The beginning of the game was largely the same, but once I was able to buy and equip multiple magic boosting accessories at once, I definitely noticed my spells starting to deal more damage. I knew Magnet and Thunder was a good combination before, but I was finding more applications for it throughout my playthrough. I also found out that Chicken Little and Fire as a combination can also serve a similar niche. This more magic-focused approach to the game also got me to use more of the Keyblades I don't normally use. Going back to the Magnet plus Thunder combo, it's important to note that Magnet cannot be comboed and is always considered a finisher. The finishing plus you start the game with for picking critical mode allows for an easy transition into a Thunder cast after. Rumbling Rose having another finishing plus attached to it allows for 2 Thunders after a Magnet. Keyblade length and crit rate no longer seem to be a factor at all in combat this time around. KH2 seems to replace that with giving Keyblade static abilities. I don't think one is necessarily better than the other, I just think the system is more appropriate for the direction KH2 decided to take its combat. Negative Combo shortens your combo by 1 step. For bosses, this is effectively useless, but in crowd fights it can help you get to your explosion finisher faster, which scales off your magic stat. Stack it with the Fenrir Keyblade, and you can get instant finishers, which can be cool for really weak enemies. Most beefier enemies won't go down in one fell swoop to a finisher, or even a double finisher though. I feel like the base 3-hit combo is the happy medium. Berserk Charge is a cool idea. It could theoretically incentivize you to expend your MP more liberally. If you're not too terribly crazy about not being able to use finishers during MP recharge, MP haste abilities can be a good compromise. You can go ham on the horizontal slashes for a little bit, but not too long to the point where you're just completely vulnerable for like a minute. While this did change up my gameplay style for the main game portion, the post-game super bosses were largely the same as in every other playthrough. By the time you get to post-game, you already have every action ability you could possibly have. Your moveset will always be the same in every playthrough at this point in the game, even if you're not at max level. That's not to say there aren't any unique and fun ways to tear through these super bosses. I still occasionally see people do creative strats randomly online. It's just so much easier to do it the safe and reliable way, you know? Could be a skill issue on my part, and I suppose in KH1 most of the really late skills in your level up path won't make that huge of an impact, but for the vast majority of the game, in KH1 you sort of choose your playstyle and commit to that the whole playthrough. In KH2 you have to put in most of the work to utilize all the tools the game gives you. This can be good in the sense that it levels the playing field for everyone. Maybe a good amount of the player base prefers consistency. Maybe people don't replay these games a billion times like I do, so they don't care. That's fair too. But to me, KH2 kind of feels like a Pokemon game where you don't really get to pick your starter, and most of your team is given to you at fixed points in the game. So like, Pokemon Yellow. Huh. Speaking of teammates, Kingdom Hearts 2 adds a lot of good features for party behavior. Instead of adjusting general behavior parameters, you can set your party members to very specific tactics. You can have them stay close to you, focus on the same target as you, or have them not attack at all, just to name a few. And they stay very loyal to these orders. If you set someone to stay off your target, they will solely go after enemies that you are actively trying to avoid. Remember how you couldn't really turn off any of Donald's spells? Before, you could only veer him more towards offensive, defensive, or advanced magic, and away from the others. Donald only has 4 spells in this game, but not only can you individually tweak how often he'll use each spell, you can straight up turn them off. Donald's spells are considered abilities now. Kinda sucks that they're eating up his AP, and I'd like Donald to have more than 4 spells, but mechanically, this is much more preferable. So more specific party behavior settings, that obviously makes me, as a Persona 3 PS2 enjoyer, very happy. But you want to know the unfortunate part? Party members can't do shit against boss fights. So remember how in KH1 your party members could at least do some damage to the bosses? They wouldn't be shredding through their health, but they'd be doing something. It takes a lot of time as is for party members to shave down a boss to 1 HP, and have Sora deal the finishing blow. Someone made a whole 2.5 hour long challenge video for it. In Kingdom Hearts 2, party members can handle normal enemies quite well, actually. Against bosses, though, they are literally dealing 1 damage every hit. It makes their presence in battle feel very superfluous outside of being item tanks and limit fodder. Yes, character-specific limits can be quite powerful, and does somewhat justify their presence in boss fights. I will not deny that. But at that point, you might as well tie limits to the drive gauge. That would easily balance out being able to use them without needing a certain active party member alive. Oh yeah, that's another thing. Party members are way more prone to dying in Kingdom Hearts 2, at least on critical mode. Oh yeah, and since Cure consumes all your MP, it means Donald will very often only be able to heal once every minute or so. It'll definitely take more item management to make sure Donald can heal you, either recovering his MP for him or having him use potions as a substitute. I think Kingdom Hearts 2 is probably where the meme of party members being bad is slightly more warranted. Not against the majority of battles, which are probably going to be normal encounters, but against the many iconic boss fights that will actually be ingrained in your memory. Except for Riku, that boy is on crack. Did you know that you can use his reaction command to give yourself, like, indefinite combo finishers? Oh, you want more random party member trivia? How about Donald's stork form in Pride Lands triple casting every spell he uses, even if he runs out of MP on the first cast? This can lead him to healing 3 different characters in quick succession. Oh, never mind, it really is just like Kingdom Hearts 1 all over again. Level design is not Kingdom Hearts 2's strong suit. I praised the first game for its excellent blend of small details, interactable objects, awkward but rewarding platforming exploration, and puzzle solving. I know these things are pretty simple in execution, and there was definitely room for improvement. But at least it was something. Kingdom Hearts 2 seems to do away with almost all of it. The design philosophy greatly shifted with the overhaul to the combat. The level design is pretty much tailored around the combat. What this results in is most of the levels being long hallways or big spacious rooms. KH2 does still retain objects you can hit and interact with, just like the first game, but these are also mostly just props for the game's combat. Most of them are breakable objects that drop things to refill your resources, be it HP, MP, money, or drive. Some of them serve as another application for reaction commands. Sometimes they explode and can damage enemies on impact, which is pretty cool. Wait, those are all just things that enemies do. It's just more shit to hit with your stick. So the funny thing is that in 2004, before the game was released, Nomura claimed that there would indeed be puzzles in Kingdom Hearts 2. So, hey, whatever happened to those? Well, when you think about it, the enemies are the puzzles! It's insane too, because Sora has so much more mobility in this game compared to the first, and even some of the games after this one, but the potential isn't really capitalized on. In the original game. See, in the Final Mix version, they added a whole ass dungeon to Hollow Bastion. Did you ever look at this wall and think to yourself, man, I sure wish there was a huge hole leading to a cavern right here. Oh. Well, there you go. This is the Cavern of Remembrance, the only dungeon to take full advantage of Sora's movement abilities and create platforming challenges out of them. It also introduces stronger variants of enemies throughout the game, and a whole new class of materials for item synthesis. So this kinda disproves that there was any ever incompatibility with the complex level design and wide open combat arenas. The dungeon does a pretty good job separating them, and there's really only one room where it makes you contend with both. That engine chamber is brutal. Tetsuya Nomura would also follow through on his promise even further by adding puzzles to the levels from the original game too. Puzzle pieces, that is. I mean, it's not much, but they're placed in areas that often require you to level your growth abilities, and you get pretty good rewards for completing these puzzles. Hell, if you're clever with chaining quick runs into other actions, you can get some of them before you're intended. Another common criticism towards KH2 is how the worlds aren't as directly involved with the story as the first games. It's an understandable sentiment. I expressed my own grievances with this in my KH1 video, saying how they chose not to involve the Disney worlds with the story too much, thus avoiding the need to make alternate cutscene variations to match up with what point in the story you're at. Part of me still does wish they could have had more of those in this game, but after revisiting this game and thinking harder on it, the notion that KH2's worlds add nothing to the story is just straight up wrong. Do they do a whole lot to advance the plot? No, but that doesn't make their contribution to the story insignificant. The world subplots do a lot, specifically for Sora. You really don't get much of a feel for Sora in the first game outside of he's just a kid. My analysis of Sora's character in the first game was largely subtextual. I spoke very little about Sora's personality because, well, there really weren't that many moments where it shined. Like, think about how many of KH1's cutscenes just have Sora's in-game model with a blank expression. Dare I say, KH2's worlds are pretty much integral to Sora's characterization. Remember in the first game, where Sora unlocked Dr. Finkel's artificial heart because he wanted to see the Heartless dance, but also so they could control the Heartless. Like some easy shortcut out of needing to fight them. This scene isn't voiced, and is only portrayed with the in-game models, so it's very easy to forget this moment. But it's one of the only times we get to see Sora's personality. Kingdom Hearts 2 has way more moments like this. While the world scenarios are more standalone, they leave more room for brevity, and for Sora to be more expressive in this game. I know a layer to this might just be Haley Joel Osment being a bit older and better at acting now, but I can assure you Sora is way more animated in this game, both figuratively and literally. You can see way more of Sora's childlike goofiness, like how excited he gets over having a piece of plastic with his name on it. He's so proud of it for no reason. He's more interested in meeting Santa Claus than the Heartless in Halloween Town. He gets so excited when he meets Jack Sparrow, a real-ass pirate. Sora's informal body language around Master Yen Sid is a very subtle display of the real Sora. This is probably what Sora was always like before the whole raft arc, then getting all depressed from losing his world and friends. Remember how Sora voluntarily wanted to help Pooh Bear and took everyone's problems seriously in that world? That's kind of how the rest of the worlds in KH2 are like. He has a strong desire to help people in need. World order be damned. Like, no joke, I'm pretty sure they just threw that whole concept out the window. They never mention it again, but they also never really mention the existence of other worlds to people who don't already know about it either. He doesn't have to get involved with other people's problems, but it's just in his nature. In fact, I think it's better that Sora takes more initiative on these short-notice emergencies. It gives off the impression that he has in fact matured and become more like a hero, whereas in the last game, he was just a bystander who had the Keyblade thrown into his hands and had to clean up what Riku started. Something about him living up to the role he was never meant to have makes it all feel worth it. It's not just moving the story along and getting all the key moments to play out. A lot of these moments are the reason Sora went from just a good character to a lovable one. Also, may I remind you that a lot of the villains of these world plots were part of Maleficent's alliance in the first game. Sure, none of them really seem all that interested in getting the gang back together, but it's not like we can just leave them alone or they'll just start their own plans of world domination. Oogie Boogie even tells Maleficent to screw off so he can murder Santa Claus or something. Oh yeah, that's another thing people complain about being dialed back. Not just the importance of the Disney worlds, but also the Disney villains too. I don't know if this is a controversial opinion or not, but I'm not sure if I'd really be all that interested in a story where Maleficent's beef with the Nobodies extends beyond just her and Pete versus Org 13. Like, really guys? The Disney Villain Court versus Organization 13? The organization is obviously way cooler. Admittedly, they could have had more of a presence in these worlds. Disney worlds have 2 chapters, so you end up visiting them twice. Aside from Atlantica and 100 Acre Wood, which are minigame worlds with progress checks after every one of them. Sometimes an org member will show up on the first visit of a world, but most of them don't properly introduce themselves until the second visit. Halloween Town never gets visited by the organization at all, but both visits are mandatory to beat the game for some reason. So what's the deal? Why aren't they more actively involved? Well, remember that their motive is for Sora to destroy the Heartless, so that they can collect the hearts. They honestly don't need to do much at all. That's just what Sora has always done. If anything, the fact that they ever need to appear on occasion at all to push things into motion is kinda surprising. But it does help characterize the organization members individually. A little bit. And it raises a pretty important question that you probably asked yourself about halfway through the game. So in a similar fashion to how the first game throws the word darkness around a lot and kind of forces you to just figure it out, Kingdom Hearts 2 puts a huge emphasis on hearts. Let's talk about Diz for a second. We'll get more into it later, but he is the real mastermind behind the research of the heart. At least, at first he was. Kingdom Hearts 2 touches more on the idea of trying to boil essentially what makes someone human, or a person, I guess, down to a science. For a 2005 to 2007 game, that's pretty ahead of its time, and also scarily relevant to the modern day. They're putting the letters A and I in front of every possible word it shouldn't be in front of. AI art, AI writing, AI dubbing. Every time I open up a Twitch stream, I'm seeing ads trying to convince me Alexa is my friend. Sure, you can study the consistencies and general rules of thumb for each of the fields I mentioned, but none of these things are shit that you can bring down to a science. And when I say bring down to a science, I mean that very literally. Science is full of constants. E will always equal mc squared. You can plug the numbers in and always get the same result. If you know all the formulas, you will always know the solution. That's not how art or human interaction works at all. Now enter the Nobody, a being that supposedly doesn't have a heart. They do not have emotions, but still have a grasp on how they work. They'll imitate them to deceive their enemies and manipulate them. That vaguely sounds like AI, and I almost mistakenly thought about making the segment all about comparing the two. But there's one problem. Nobodies are not machines, and that's a pretty important distinction. In future games we'll find out that all of this no heart stuff is hogwash, and that nobodies actually can develop their own hearts through experiences and developing relationships, and not in the way AI learns those things, like X action leads to Y response. I mean more in like a human way, learning empathy and growing attachments to people and things. And it's a shame too, because the ambiguity of whether or not nobodies can have emotions without physical hearts makes it far more interesting. Or, whatever state of matter you call this. Just like with the darkness, it's a lot more interesting to postulate when you don't take any of the later games into account. The organization members still retain their memories from when they still had hearts. Some of them just mimic their past personalities. In fact, a good amount of them I'd consider very animated and expressive. Others do not even attempt to mimic emotions, but rather use their knowledge of how they work to manipulate people. Zaldin gaslights Beast into thinking no one could ever love him to bring out his frustration. He holds both the person and object Beast cares the most about hostage and tries to make him choose between them. But damn, I guess he's a pushover. Saïx makes Sora doubt and question himself by telling him that destroying the Heartless will only feed more hearts into Kingdom Hearts, which brings them closer to their goal. When he tells Sora the organization has Kairi hostage, he leads Sora on by having him think they'll let her go if he shows how desperate he is, then immediately pulls the rug out from under him. Saïx doesn't even attempt to mimic emotions like the other members, but he does express an emotion in his boss fight. So, a neat thing about nobodies in Kingdom Hearts is that they're all inspired and named after Final Fantasy job classes, with each organization member basically being the strongest version of said class. It's neat. You wanna know what emotion Saïx expresses? The name of his job class kinda gives it away. Yeah, it's the Berserker. It's almost too befitting of him. Tranquil as the moon one moment, blind rage the next. It's actually kind of tragic that the only emotion he's able to feel, even if just for a brief moment, is rage. And it's not even like the human kind of rage. It's more like an animalistic rampage. I don't think this guy really has a good reason to feel human at this point. What a miserable existence. Maybe he's the one who needed Kingdom Hearts the most.
Why? Kingdom Hearts. Where is my heart?
Then you've got the sort of lukewarm cases. Zigbar's got an attitude for sure, but he never really expresses any emotions outside of weirdly confident. Luxord is a gambler, and as such, fits the stereotype of treating everything like a game of chance. In a way, you could see this attitude as cold and heartless. He could behave this way because he lacks the emotions to care what damage it does. Demyx is an interesting case. He's the first organization member you run into while exploring the Disney worlds. Definitely an interesting pick for a first encounter, because Demyx is one of the more convincing cases for nobodies having hearts. He's not really all that confrontational for an antagonist. He tries to avoid fighting as much as possible. Your first battle with him is just his water clones. When the other org members tease him about volunteering himself to go on the offensive if things go wrong, he immediately loses his bravado. He's playful and kind of a coward down to the moment he's finally forced to fight you for real. When Sora and friends mock him, he's pretty insistent that nobodies do have hearts. His weapon of choice is music, which is a form of expression, and to his credit, he did do a pretty good job convincing the audience up to this point. But after they tease him just a bit too much, the mask finally slips off. He momentarily returns to being an emotionless nobody, and is uncharacteristically straight with this comeback. The illusion is broken. He is, without a doubt, a nobody, through and through. Lastly, we have the ones that challenge this idea the most, Axel and Roxas. Axel and Roxas consistently show a wide range of emotions that come off just way too naturally. We're told that these two were best friends before the events of the game. You can tell Axel was genuinely sad when Roxas made his decision to leave. Axel hesitates when ordered to eliminate Roxas, and is genuinely upset when Roxas doesn't remember him. You can't seriously watch these scenes and tell me these emotions aren't real.
You get on their bad side and they'll destroy you!
No one would miss me.
That's not true. I would.
Axel goes against the wishes of the organization to try and get Roxas back. He kidnaps Kairi and tries to mess with Sora to get him to turn to darkness, in hopes of turning him into a Heartless again. This man goes some lengths, and the reason he values his friendship with Roxas so much is because he made him feel like he had a heart. It made him feel human. The other org members discuss this among themselves, as though Axel is chasing something he can never have. A heart? A genuine friendship? His humanity back? Or all of the above? The prologue humanizes Roxas so much that there is no way his emotions aren't real. Even in his more trivial life problems, you could see his very human reactions to them. The look on his face when Cypher teases them makes you think they were actually rivals. You can tell how much he cares about his friends by the way he interacts with them. He tries to make things right when they mistakenly think Roxas was hanging out with their rivals, or when he got the money they worked hard to save up stolen, or when he forgot the promise he made with Hainer. You can feel his anger towards Diz, and being treated as an extension of Sora rather than himself. Oh yeah, and the part where he literally sheds a tear through Sora when he departs from Twilight Town? I think one of the most telling moments is when Roxas and Kairi momentarily contact telepathically. As soon as he realizes who she is, his immediate response is, "Oh yeah, you're that girl he likes." Being able to recognize simple emotions like happiness and sadness is one thing, but the fact Roxas has a solid grasp on what love is, and immediately recognizes it so casually speaks volumes. I think the conversation between Axel and Roxas inside Sora's heart kinda sums up the whole dilemma. But not the version we got in the West. Do you guys remember that old fan translation of KH2 Final Mix? Some of you probably feel really old after I ask that. This was well before the official dub of the once unvoiced cutscenes were a thing. Now, disclaimer, I don't know Japanese, so I'm not gonna make any claims over which translation of the scene is more accurate. I just wanted to point out the distinction in the way it's worded. So, in the localization, Axel asks Roxas if maybe they all do have hearts. Roxas is unsure but postulates if they really do have hearts, they'd feel it. But before being able to continue that thought, probably to say he does feel something, he stops himself. Okay, so I guess they do have hearts then. This scene comes off entirely differently in the old translation. In this version of the dialogue, Axel asks something along the lines of, "Roxas, you have a heart, don't you? While Naminé and I don't." Roxas then says the heart isn't something you can see, and that maybe it's not even something you can feel either. Wait, no, that's entirely different. One version of the scene seems to lean into the idea that nobodies can have hearts, while the other leans into the idea that Roxas is special because he might be the only one who truly has a heart. But not even he knows the answer for sure. What even is a heart? If you're constantly in a state of acting 24/7, isn't that just who you are at that point? If a nobody acts a certain way because it's the only way they know how, at what point does that just not become your personality? Should we really be boiling down philosophical questions to scientific absolutes?
I'm a fool. I spent years studying the workings of the heart. The process of encoding hearts is incalculable. The inhabitants of my Twilight Town were data created from real hearts. I was convinced that they would think and behave the way I had envisioned, but I couldn't have been more wrong. A heart is so much more than any system.
Roxas will never find the answer because he'll fade away into Sora's consciousness. So the only one who can find that answer is him. You see what I did there? I used an ambiguous pronoun because this is the part he accepts himself as part of Sora. I spoke in great depth about how relatable the first game is from a perspective of growing up, but something I don't hear enough people talk about is how Kingdom Hearts 2 is also very relatable. Maybe not so much in its specific examples, but just the overarching theme in general. That theme being identity. Something that's arguably just as universal, but far more overlooked than coming of age. You have not lived long enough if you've never had any struggles with your identity. It doesn't have to be an extreme identity crisis, it can be something as simple as constantly being compared to others, insecurities about your masculinity or femininity or whatever's in between that, feeling like the extra in the friend group, wondering if everyone would just move on with their lives if you disappeared. I mentioned earlier how everyone involved in Sora's memory restoration treated Roxas as an extension of Sora. If you wanted to, you could loosely relate this to something like only being known as that person's sibling, or being the heir to the family business, something that boils you down to your relationship to things of interest, rather than anything that actually defines you. Ah yes, the nobody of Sora, who is only important to the organization because he can use the Keyblade just like Sora. The nobody who only matters because he holds half of Sora's being and is the key to waking him up. We want Sora, not you, don't you get it, kid? I guess having 2 Keyblades doesn't make you cool enough to exist. The organization does kind of the opposite with Sora. The members constantly call him Roxas, and talk to him casually like they know each other. They do this knowing that Roxas is gone and are purely messing with them. Roxas kind of takes over at certain moments at Twilight Town in particular. Sora feels nostalgia for Twilight Town and sadness for leaving, when he literally has no reason to. It's only sensible that this would eventually lead up to a clash between the 2 personalities within him. There are 2 wolves inside me, and one of them is Jesse McCartney. Best marketing strategy to get girls into this game. After Sora finds out Roxas was his nobody, he's probably like the first person to be truly sympathetic to him. Well, I guess Riku too, retroactively. Something else we didn't really get to see in KH1 is Sora getting to identify with the locals in his travels. Sora already has been on a pirate ship, but this is the first time we've ever seen him express any desire to be a pirate. There's also more romance? Like, yeah, there were existing couples in KH1, but now we actually get to see them loving each other. Ew! He doesn't do this with every couple he sees, but there are a couple instances where Sora low-key kinda seeing himself and Kairi in some of these couples. Then Donald and Goofy tease him about it, like, hee, Sora likes Kairi. Except they don't actually say it. Remember how I said in KH1 that it's really obvious, but the game respects your intelligence enough not to overstate it? Well, outside of Roxas just casually mentioning it, I don't think they ever really mention it explicitly again. Although there was that one part where after telling her story to the Twilight Town gang, Olette calls it a romantic story. And honestly, Kairi kinda looks proud of it. She also uses some romantically charged language, like saying she and Sora will be together every day. Oh, you poor girl. But tying things back to identity, notice how during Sora's memories flashing back, they'd always cut off right when Sora says Kairi's name. It's implied the last and most important missing memories were his memories of Kairi. And when you take a second to consider that Kairi's heart was inside Sora's for a time, Kairi has also ingrained herself onto Sora's identity. Your most precious memories are a big part of what makes you who you are. But that's a discussion more suited for Chain of Memories. Alright, it's time to finally address that thing.
He wasn't really handsome. He just went around telling everybody that he was.
Now, I've seen some people complain about how this is too confusing. First of all, yeah, I think that's kind of what they were going for. You're kinda supposed to be at least a little confused at first. But then minutes after it's explained to the characters, Goofy fully comprehends the situation. I mean, come on guys, if Goofy can understand it, so can you. The characters stealing each other's names and likenesses is also part of this important theme of identity. The game decides to drop a bombshell smack in the middle of the game where it turns out the guy we defeated in the first game was not actually Ansem. He's an apprentice of Ansem's who stole his research and his identity. The real Ansem discards his own identity and calls himself Diz, which would have been fine on its own, but actually becomes kinda lame when you know what it stands for. Darkness in Zero. You didn't have to make it an acronym, but alright. Once again, there's some pretty good lore tucked within the secret Ansem reports. These ones are actually written by him, by the way, but it's not too relevant for this video. Riku, on the other hand, is going through all sorts of layers of identity crisis, so even after fake Ansem's defeat, his darkness was still hidden away inside him. So for the past year, he's had that lingering over him constantly. In order to defeat Roxas, he had to become the man that he feared the most, and use his power to survive. He stays within the shadows for most of the game, hooded in the same cloak the organization wears. He stirs a bit of confusion among the characters as to who he is or whose side he's on. He's already lost his body to Ansem once, and while he has full control of his consciousness this time, he still looks like him. It's as if they've become the same person practically. And funnily enough, it's only after the real Ansem dies when Riku becomes himself again. That's it. All the Ansem went away in that instance. And then Riku joins your party and you beat the final boss together and it's the coolest fucking thing ever. Okay, I get it. Kingdom Hearts 2 isn't everyone's favorite. But it's nobody's least favorite either. The story might have gotten a bit more ambitious than some might have liked. The level design doesn't invoke a lot of curiosity or incentive to explore. The gameplay kind of encourages more of a play-it-by-ear mentality over experimentation, even though the latter is more beneficial and makes the game more fun. And yet, this game still remains one of my favorite games of all time. After finishing the Kingdom Hearts 1 video and finding so much more to appreciate than I ever could have thought, I was afraid that returning to Kingdom Hearts 2 wouldn't be as satisfying. That maybe Kingdom Hearts 2 just wasn't my favorite anymore. Comparing my current reference point for KH1 to my previous reference point for 2 was not doing it any favors. I was fully expecting to come into this video saying that Kingdom Hearts 2 has gotten stale for me. I was ready to say something along the lines of, while the combat is more satisfying, it suffers from diminishing returns. I was ready to go on a tangent on how aimless the plot and world integration are, and how Kingdom Hearts 1 did it better. Well, KH1 did do some things better, but so did KH2. It never had to be perfect in every area to become one of the greatest games ever. Most great games don't. Hell, Kingdom Hearts 1 didn't have to. Kingdom Hearts 2, in spite of where it falls short, makes up for it tenfold in the areas it does excel. Its themes and storytelling were so much richer than I previously gave it credit for. While there were some missteps, and being a sequel kinda begs for the comparisons to its predecessor, the game did actually take risks, and the payoff outweighed what was lost. But getting that high payoff doesn't mean you'll get through completely unscathed. Sometimes you lose track of things, sometimes you gotta cut things out entirely to make deadlines or prevent the scope of the project from getting out of control. Nothing with these games goes perfectly, and if it does, you probably weren't trying very hard to begin with. When you think about what your favorite game is, your mind doesn't go to the most squeaky clean, inoffensive game you can think of. It has rough edges that you're more than content reconciling with. I'm not trying to say the more flaws the better, I'm saying that striving for greatness does not mean striving for perfection. A game that's worth loving will be loved, flaws and all.